What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. Alright, before I get into this video, I want to give a shout out to James for his donation to the channel. And sorry I'm just not getting to replying to your message in the donation. As far as your message is concerned, I'm gonna try to do that sometime this week. So, I saw what you said, you know what I'm saying? So I'll try to do that sometime this week. Alright, so, like I said, I want to thank James, a long-time contributor to this channel, and I want to thank everybody that's contributed to this channel over the past year, and those who have supported my channel over the past several years, you know what I'm saying? Look, we not always agree with each other when it comes to debates. We're not going to agree with every issue. But I look at the LDBC as a family, and family don't agree with everything, but we love each other over here. And ain't nobody going to come out, no outsiders going to come out and try to pit me against this person or that person because of fucking basketball. So if you try to do some shit like that, go fuck yourself. And to the people who keep asking me to debate that Galaxy guy, I'm not going to do it. I don't even want to respond to him because he's a troll, okay? I'm a person that tries to look at things logically. I'm an emotional guy. I get pissed off. But at the end of the day, I try to look at things logically. He has an agenda. So it's no purpose in me debating somebody who A, has an agenda, and B, really doesn't want to debate you. He really wants to interrogate you and put you on the defensive. That's not a debate what he does over there. Okay? I've said this before, but let me clarify. That's not a debate what he does. Okay? What he does is get you to explain why you think this, and then he, for the rest of his little show, whatever it's called, he puts you on defensive. He doesn't reveal who he feels is the best, so you can counter and put him on defensive. He just trying to put you in the hot seat the whole time. It's a cross-examination, and when you cross-examine somebody, no matter what you do, you're going to look bad. So that's what that is. So anyway, let me get to the point of this video. So if it look like this, if we had a neutral format and we were able to debate shit and there was a moderator, fine, I'd tear his ass up. But that shit he's doing, that's not a fucking debate. So anyway, let me get to this video, man. I've been thinking about this. I felt this way for quite some time. And I just feel like when it comes to Michael Jordan, right? I feel like one aspect of this GOAT debate doesn't get addressed enough. And it's the fact that you can make a strong argument that Michael Jordan did so much with so little. And there are some people that can talk about how his tactics, may be too extreme, may have been too extreme. But when Michael Jordan is talking about having people get to his level, he's not talking about skill set. He knows that those guys, aren't going to get to his abilities. He's talking about approaching the game from his perspective, from his level, from his intensity. That's what he's talking about. And apparently it works. Because if you look at that, it worked. Because if you look at that rosters, just be honest, even if you're the biggest Michael Jordan hater in the goddamn world, and people have a good reason to hate him. But if you look at those goddamn rosters, in particular the 93 and the 98 seasons, and you look at some of the rosters of other teams that you like, you know deep down in your goddamn heart, you know you're thinking to yourself, damn, how the fuck could this Bulls team who won a championship, how could they have been so dominant? Like, if you go through the history of champions, dynasties, or multiple champions, go all the way back to George Mikan and the Minneapolis Lakers in the 1950s. Well, shit, he had the best players of his era, the early to mid 50s, all pretty much on his team. You had George Mikan, Clyde Leverett, who was the best forward in the league. You had Jim Pollard, who was the most athletic player in the league at that time, for those times. Slater Martin, the best defensive point guard in the league, guard period probably, and a young Clyde Leverett toward the end, who was a bruiser. No wonder they were a dynasty. Now let's fast forward a little bit to Bill Russell. Bill Russell is a tremendous basketball player. Okay? Can't take that away from him. But let's look at something here. Even to this day, and here we are, 63 years since they won their first title. 63 years. And 3 of those players are still considered top 30, 35 all-time players. Bill Russell, John Havlicek, and Bob Cousy. "20 years ago, Bill Sharman and Sam Jones were considered top 50 players. Now, in most people's eyes, they've slipped out of the top 50. But the fact remains, Bill Russell won 11 titles in 13 years. And yes, they were not dominant before or after him. So you have to put him up with the all-time greats. No doubt about it. But Bill Russell did play with 12 Hall of Famers during his career. The great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Now, arguably, he has a great argument for being the GOAT basketball player ever, which I do believe he's the GOAT basketball player ever. NBA player, I got him number 2. But he has an argument for number 1. If someone thinks he's number 1, I have no problem with that whatsoever. But let's be honest about something. When he was with Milwaukee, okay, he was playing with Oscar Robertson. Now, Robertson was getting a little bit toward the out of his prime, but Oscar Robertson was still a great goddamn player. Okay, he was playing with Oscar Robertson, and he was playing with Bob Dandridge, who I told you was something like the Kawhi Leonard of the 1970s. Not quite as dominant, but he was, sort of a player's style and skill set like him. So it wasn't like he didn't have anybody on those teams. Also, Lucius Allen and I believe Bob Boozer were on those Milwaukee Bucks teams. Now, do I have to really go into detail about the Lakers? Who was on those rosters? With Cap, James Worthy, Bob McAdoo, a former league MVP, 3-time scoring champion. Not the same player, but still. Bob McAdoo. Norm Nixon, who's giving you 17 points and 8 assists a game, 9 assists a game. Jamal Wilkes, when he was the Golden State Warriors, giving you 24, 25 points a game. Still giving you 17, 18, 19 points a game. Later on, Byron Scott, Michael Cooper. And of course, Magic Johnson. And I just answered my own question or my own points with Magic as to who he was playing with in the 80s. Now, Magic went to 9 finals in 12 years. It's phenomenal. But they didn't really have that much competition in the Western Conference. Now, Larry Bird, great player. But they had the best front line in NBA history. Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish. Not to mention Cedric Cornbread Maxwell. One year they had Pete Maravich coming off the bench, although it was his last year and he was pretty much done as a player. But still, it worth noting that he had Pete Maravich come off the bench his first year. At the beginning of the Boston little dynasty, they had Nate Archibald, who in 1972-73 became the first and only player to lead the NBA in scoring and assists at 34 points and 11 assists per game. Later on, of course, they had the great Dennis Johnson, who wasn't even at his best with the Boston Celtics, became more of a defensive player, focused on defense, and was not the same player. You know, there's some parallels between Dennis Johnson and Ron Harper as far as their careers. Like, they started off as slashing scorers. Ron Harper was more athletic, but Dennis Johnson had the same play, sort of a similar playing style with the Phoenix Suns and the Seattle Supersonics. But then by the time he played with the championship team, injuries and age had took it away some of his quickness, but he was more of a defensive stopper. And then, of course, they had Bill Walton come on the bench in the 86. My point is, those Celtics teams were loaded. Even Isaiah Thomas, okay? Now, he may not have had those top 10, 20 great players, but those Pistons teams were very deep, okay? Let's not forget, now, even though Bill Laimbeer was a thug, okay, and any Chicago Bulls fan will tell you he was a goddamn thug, you know what I'm saying, and his playing style and the influence he had on the Pistons led to one of the reasons why they were so disliked by not just the Chicago Bulls, but every other team in the NBA. But Bill Laimbeer was a pretty goddamn good player, okay? Bill Laimbeer, at his best, would get you at least 10 to 12 points and 10 rebounds a game. And he was a good defensive player. You got to give him that. He was a good defensive player. All right? But that team also had, outside of Isaiah Thomas, they had Joe Dumars, who's a Hall of Famer. And Joe Dumars, at his best in the early to mid-1990s, arguably now, outside of Michael Jordan, was the best shooting guard in the Eastern Conference in that time period. I would put him even ahead of Reggie Miller. Okay, now injuries, robbed Joe Dumars of a lot of his quickness, a lot of his defensive ability by the mid-90s. His ability to go laterally with guys. He wasn't the same guy anymore. Okay. But Joe Dumars is a Hall of Famer. Dennis Rodman would eventually become a Hall of Famer. Okay, Dennis Rodman wasn't getting the minutes that he got later on during the championship era, but they had Dennis Rodman. They had John Sally. They had Mark Aguirre in the championship years. Mark Aguirre should be in the Hall of Fame. All right? I think his resume is enough for him to be in the Hall of Fame. All right? I think during the 84-85 season, I think it was, Mark Aguirre, I think he was third in the league in scoring or second in the league in scoring. And he has the record for highest points per game average with the Dallas Mavericks. They had Adrian Dantley, who was probably the most dominant scorer in the NBA in the early to mid-1980s. Won 2 scoring titles with the Utah Jazz. Okay, a bona fide star. Now, some people might question his focus on defense, but when it came to putting the ball in the basket, AD was the best in the business, or amongst the best in the business. Then they had Vinnie Johnson, who, if you watch Vinnie Johnson, should be in the Hall of Fame. You know, some people tell you he should be in the Hall of Fame just based off of his his scoring ability. You know what I'm saying? Vinnie Johnson, when he got hot, was unbelievable. I mean, he would make the most difficult shots under pressure, make him look easy, make it look like he was on rookie mode in NBA 2K. So the Detroit Bad Boys, there was a really good team around Isaiah Thomas. Okay? Julius Erving arguably had the most, throughout his entire career with the Sixers, had the most talent around him. And, you know, I'm not knocking him, but he probably should have won more than one championship. But during his career, he played with Moses Malone. Later on, of course, he had Charles Barkley, he had Andrew Toney, Bobby Jones, George McGinnis, World B. Free, earlier Lloyd B. Free, Darryl Dawkins, Caldwell Jones. He had a lot of talent around him. Okay, like to the point where they should have won at least 2 titles, in my opinion. At least 2. Now, all these teams I've named, okay, all these guys, they had help. They had a lot of help around them. Michael Jordan only played with, I guess 3 Hall of Famers or 4. Technically, I know Robert Parrish is a Hall of Famer, but that was his last year. 43 years old. Only played in 43 games, I think, during the season. And, you know, that's a wishy-washy. But technically, he was a Hall of Famer, okay? But really, Michael Jordan played with only Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman. Horace Grant was a fine player, but he's not a Hall of Famer. You can make a case that he really underachieved. I don't know why Horace Grant couldn't even average 18 and 10. You know what I'm saying? He could have. But that's pretty much it. And Dennis Rodman was an offensive liability. Dennis Rodman was going to get you consistently double figures. Scottie Pippen, when you look at the second three-peat, was an offensive liability. He was starting to become an offensive liability. During the first three-peat, Scottie Pippen was more consistent offensively. Scottie Pippen would shoot about 50% more frequently for the seasons. But after, I'd say, the 95-96 season, it was midway during the 95-96 season, I think Scottie Pippen suffered a mild back injury, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was that midway through that season. And Scottie Pippen slowly diminished as a player. He became more and more offensively inconsistent. Like, for instance, Scottie might average 18 points for a year, but he was very inconsistent. One night, Scottie might put up 28 points, shoot 7 of, 13 from the floor, 5 of 9 from three-point range. He might just be hitting everything. Then the next night, might get to the foul line a lot, slashing, look like his old self. Then the next 2 nights, Scottie might go a combined 8 for 29 or something like that. You guys, if you remember Scottie during the second three-peat, know what I'm talking about. Now, on the defensive end, Scottie was still solid. Scottie was still a great defensive force. But offensively, especially during the playoffs, he could disappear, as did sometimes Tony Kukoc. So what I remember is a lot of times Michael, especially in that second three-peat, had to go above and beyond to carry the load offensively, to the point where it was wearing him down. Like one year, I think it was 98, Mike had kind of turned into a shot jacker, but it was kind of out of necessity because nobody else was doing any fucking thing. But in my opinion, when you look at those Bulls rosters, I'm not trying to knock these guys, because I know that some LeBron fans do this. I'm not trying to knock them. But when you look at those rosters, you don't see a lot. Even LeBron James, when he was with Cleveland the second time, all right, he had Kyrie Irving, who's going to be a Hall of Famer, and Kevin Love, who I think is going to be a borderline Hall of Famer. I think he's going to get in. If you got some of these other guys getting in, you know, like the Tracy McGrady, Kevin Love in, especially now that he has a championship ring. All right. Then of course, Chris Bosh should be a Hall of Famer next year. Then of course, Dwayne Wade is going to be a Hall of Famer eventually. So my point is, I think Mike did more with less. Being that they were so dominant in the 1990s. Being that Michael Jordan was just so individually dominant. Let's take this into a perspective. Michael Jordan won in just 3 years 10 awards. He won 3 NBA championships. He won 3 final MVPs. All right. He won 2 league MVPs and 2 All-Star Game MVPs. All at a time when many people were starting to consider him to be out of his prime, on the downside of his career, having missed 2 years of his prime. But yet he was still able to do this with, in my opinion, a roster that just doesn't stack up overall with some of the all-time great rosters. I mean, you got guys like Judd Buechler, Bill Wennington, Scott Burrell, Dickie Simpkins, Jason Caffey. These are the type of players that are just a few bad games away from being in the old CBA. Steve Kerr was fighting to stay in the NBA before Jordan came back. But because of the influence of a guy like Michael Jordan, you have people introduce Steve Kerr as the NBA legend, 5-time champion Steve Kerr. In my opinion, if it wasn't for the influence of Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen would probably, if he had just went to Seattle, he'd probably be a player maybe seen as marginally better than Stacey Augmon. Michael's drive and intensity and his influence and his, if you want to say it, bullying, drove Pippen to be a better player than he would have naturally have been. Now, whether I rank Scottie Pippen, I don't rank him 21 overall. I'll give you that. If I had to rank him, I'd put him somewhere in the 35 to 40 range. But, like I said, I know a lot of people are glad, going to breathe a sigh of relief that it's going to be over tonight, The Last Dance. Things can go back to normal, 24/7 La Media. But at the end of the day, I think that Michael Jordan, when you look at what he had to deal with as far as rosters are concerned, talent, he got the most out of those players than anybody else could have dreamed of. Even Kobe, the late great Kobe, had Shaq, a top 10 all-time player. And he had Pau Gasol, who's probably going to be in the Hall of Fame. You know what I'm saying? He had, some great players around him. Mike to me just got a lot out of a lot of marginal guys to me. But tell me what you guys think.